What started as a minor controversy at Robert Morris University has now spiraled into a full-blown scandal that no one saw coming. New shocking revelations have emerged, and the situation is escalating faster than anyone could have predicted. With key players now implicated, this is no longer just a campus issue, it's making national headlines. What's really going on behind closed doors? The latest twist will leave you speechless. Stay tuned as this explosive story continues to unfold. What started as a small whisper quickly turned into a full-blown scandal that shook the foundation of Robert Morris's life and ministry. For years, Robert Morris had been the face of Gateway Church in Texas, one of the largest and most influential megachurches in the country. He was respected, admired, and seen by many as a beacon of faith. But in early 2024, everything changed. The rumors that had been circulating for decades suddenly resurfaced, and this time they couldn't be ignored. It all began with whispers about a troubling incident from Robert's past. Back in 1982, when Morris was still a traveling preacher in Oklahoma, allegations emerged that he had been involved in a disturbing event with a young girl. For years, these claims were dismissed, forgotten, or swept under the rug. People close to Morris believed the accusations were nothing more than old stories, hearsay, with no real foundation. But in early 2024, things took a dramatic turn. A grand jury in Oklahoma took a closer look at the case, and before anyone could blink, 5 serious criminal charges were filed against Morris. The news hit hard. Suddenly, this respected spiritual leader, who had shaped thousands of lives and built one of the most powerful ministries in the country, was facing the possibility of criminal trial. The accusations weren't just hearsay anymore, they were real. And with the weight of the legal system behind them, it was clear that this wasn't going to go away quietly. For the people who had followed Robert Morris for years, it was a devastating blow. They had listened to his sermons, donated to his ministry, and looked up to him as a spiritual guide. Now they found themselves questioning everything. Could the man they had trusted really be the same person who was now being accused of such dark and serious allegations? For some, the shock was overwhelming. Others tried to defend him, saying that he was innocent and that this was all a smear campaign. But as the charges grew in seriousness, even his most loyal supporters couldn't deny that something was terribly wrong. Morris tried to keep a low profile, hoping to avoid the media circus that was quickly surrounding him. He remained quiet, hoping the storm would pass, but it didn't. The media dug deeper, and soon, the story grew even more complicated. The accusations from the 1980s were only the beginning. Reports began to surface questioning Morris's financial dealings and his lifestyle as a pastor. People started asking whether his lavish lifestyle, built on the tithes and donations of his church members, was truly in line with the humble life he had preached about for decades. The scandal quickly spiraled, and Morris, once a figure of admiration, was now a symbol of everything people feared about the intersection of faith and power. The news spread like wildfire, and the ripple effects were felt not just within Gateway Church, but throughout the entire evangelical community. Many people who had trusted Morris, who had believed in the message he preached, were left asking themselves how to reconcile his teachings about faith and humility with the shocking allegations and his extravagant lifestyle. As more and more details came to light, it became clear that this was no ordinary scandal. It was something that had the potential to unravel everything Morris had built. The accusations, the legal battle, and the growing suspicion about his financial dealings all combined to cast a shadow over his entire legacy. What had once been a respected ministry was now the center of a storm, and no one knew where it would end. As the scandal surrounding Robert Morris grew more intense, the shockwaves didn't stop with the criminal charges. They spread even further when a massive financial dispute emerged, revealing just how high the stakes were and how deep the drama ran. Just when people thought things couldn't get worse, they did. This financial battle would not only threaten Morris's reputation, but would shake the foundation of Gateway Church to its core. It all began after Robert Morris resigned from his position as the senior pastor of Gateway Church in 2024. The resignation seemed like the natural next step given the mounting pressure from the criminal allegations against him, but it wasn't the end of his story. It was just the beginning of another. The real shock came when Morris revealed that he was owed millions by Gateway Church as part of an agreement he had allegedly made with church leaders years earlier. It was a claim that would spiral into a bitter financial dispute. Morris said that in 2014, when Gateway Church was at its peak, the leadership had promised him a retirement package worth millions. This wasn't just some handshake deal or casual conversation. According to Morris, it was a solemn promise, a reward for his years of service building Gateway into one of the largest and most successful megachurches in the country. The agreement, Morris claimed, was simple but staggering. $1 million up front, followed by annual payments of $800,000 until he reached the age of 70. After that, the payments would drop slightly to $600,000 a year, but they would continue for the rest of his life. And when Morris passed, his wife Debbie would continue receiving that $600,000 every year until her death. To Morris, this wasn't just some nice gesture or gift from the church. It was a promise, a recognition of all the work he had put into Gateway over the years. He had built the church from the ground up, expanding it into one of the largest and most influential religious organizations in America. So naturally, he believed he was entitled to the financial security that came with it. It seemed fair to him. After all, he had devoted decades of his life to the church, pouring his time, energy, and faith into the ministry. Now, in his eyes, it was time for the church to honor that commitment. But when Morris asked for the money, Gateway Church was quick to deny the claim. The church leadership argued that there was no written agreement, no signed contract that backed up Morris's story. They said that all of the talks about his retirement package were based on casual conversations, verbal promises, and handshakes, nothing more. Without any concrete documentation to support Morris's claim, the church took a firm stance. There was no legal obligation to pay him a single dime. This, of course, didn't sit well with Morris. He wasn't backing down. He believed the church had made a promise, and he was going to hold them to it. But the reality of the situation was clear. Without a contract or written agreement, the church wasn't legally bound to fulfill that promise. And so, a massive financial dispute broke out. At first, it seemed like something that could be resolved quietly behind closed doors. But as soon as the details of the dispute started to leak to the public, everything changed. Gateway Church members who had trusted Morris for years were left stunned. The church was built on the idea of community, of faith, of generosity. People had poured their hard-earned money into the ministry, believing that it was going to outreach programs, mission trips, and building God's kingdom. But now they learned that their former pastor was demanding millions of dollars for his retirement. How could this be? How could someone who had preached about selflessness, about humility, about giving everything to God, now turn around and ask for such an enormous payout? The public outrage was immediate and intense. Many members of Gateway Church felt completely betrayed. They had believed in Morris, had supported him with their donations, and had trusted him as their spiritual leader. But now, it seemed that Morris was just another example of a pastor taking advantage of his position. The contrast between his teachings about generosity and his demand for millions of dollars was stark. It felt like hypocrisy to many. How could Morris, who had spent years telling people to live simply and give sacrificially, now ask for such a lavish retirement? How could someone who had built a church on faith and sacrifice now fight so hard for financial security when the church's members were struggling to make ends meet? As the news spread, the outrage grew. People took to social media to express their anger and disbelief. The story went viral, and every new detail only fueled the fire. Gateway Church members who had once been loyal followers began questioning everything. Some people started canceling their memberships. Others spoke out at church services, asking how Morris could justify such an extravagant payout when so many in the congregation were barely getting by. The idea that the church was built on the backs of the faithful, only to have their money go towards an enormous retirement package for one man, was too much for many to bear. For Morris, the situation was incredibly frustrating. He believed that he was owed the money and that the church was backing out of a promise. But for Gateway Church, it was a matter of principle. They couldn't just give in to Morris's demands without proof of the agreement. They couldn't set a precedent where verbal promises or informal agreements could lead to millions of dollars in payouts. The financial implications of such a decision were huge, and the church leaders knew they couldn't just ignore the legal and financial consequences of honoring an unrecorded agreement. The dispute became even more complicated when it became clear that Morris wasn't exactly struggling financially. Despite his resignation from the church, he continued to live a lavish lifestyle. Reports began to surface about his real estate dealings in Texas. He was buying and selling luxury properties, some worth millions of dollars. There were photos of sprawling estates, mansions with lakefront views, and luxury homes that seemed to be in direct contrast to the humble life he had preached about for decades. To many, this was the final straw. They had been donating money to the church, thinking it was going to support community outreach and ministry. Instead, they now saw their former pastor living in million-dollar homes and fighting for millions more. The public perception was that Morris didn't need the money. He had already accumulated vast wealth through his time at Gateway Church. His real estate dealings and lavish lifestyle only added fuel to the fire. For critics, this wasn't just about a pastor asking for a retirement package. It was about greed. How could a man who had preached about humility and sacrifice for years now live in luxury and demand millions more from the church he helped build? Gateway Church tried to put out the flames by insisting that they weren't hiding anything. The leadership filed paperwork to block Morris from using arbitration to resolve the dispute privately. They argued that the church and its congregation deserved transparency, especially when millions of dollars were at stake. They didn't want this fight to remain behind closed doors. They wanted the public to see exactly what was happening, to know the truth, and to understand why they couldn't meet Morris's demands. As the legal battle dragged on, the story continued to unfold in the public eye. News outlets and social media commentators dug deeper into Morris's finances, revealing more about his luxurious lifestyle and the growing divide between the life he preached and the life he was living. Some church members still stood by him, saying that he had earned his wealth through decades of hard work. Others couldn't reconcile his lavish lifestyle with the principles he had spent years preaching. The financial dispute was about more than just money. It was about trust. It was about the perception that a man of God, who had once been seen as a spiritual father to thousands, had crossed a line. The controversy wasn't just about Morris's request for millions. It was about what it revealed about the wider culture of megachurches, about the blurred lines between faith, wealth, and power. And as the fight continued, it seemed that the damage to Morris's reputation and to Gateway Church was only just beginning. As the storm around Robert Morris continued to gather force, another aspect of the scandal emerged that sent shockwaves through his congregation and beyond. It wasn't just the criminal allegations or the bitter financial dispute that caught people's attention. It was something even more troubling: the stark contrast between the life he preached and the life he was actually living. For years, Robert Morris had built his reputation on messages of humility, generosity, and selflessness. He had preached about living simply, about giving to others, and about the importance of putting faith over material wealth. But now, as more details about his personal lifestyle came to light, it seemed that the man who had preached these values was living in a way that contradicted everything he had taught. It all started when the media began digging into Morris's personal finances after the financial dispute with Gateway Church became public. As they uncovered more about his wealth, it became clear that the man who had once preached about living humbly and sacrificially was living a life of extreme luxury. Morris wasn't just living comfortably, he was living in a way that most people could only dream of. He had purchased multiple high-end properties across Texas, some worth millions of dollars. These weren't modest homes or suburban houses. They were sprawling estates complete with lakeside views, expansive ranches, and mansions with state-of-the-art finishes. Pictures of these properties began circulating online, showing vast lawns, luxurious swimming pools, and private docks. For a man who had spent years teaching his followers about humility, it was hard to ignore how at odds these homes were with his public persona. Morris had built his ministry on the idea of service, sacrifice, and putting others first. He had told his congregation time and time again that generosity was key, that true faith meant giving to others, even if it was difficult. He had preached about living simply, about avoiding the trappings of wealth and excess. But now, the reality of his personal life seemed to contradict everything he had said. while his followers were struggling to make ends meet, some sacrificing their own resources to support the church and its mission. Morris was buying multi-million-dollar mansions like it was nothing. This didn't just feel like hypocrisy, it felt like a betrayal. For the people who had supported Morris for years, this was a tough pill to swallow. Many of them had given sacrificially to Gateway Church, believing that their donations were going toward programs to help the community, support mission trips, and spread the message of faith. They had trusted that the money they were giving was being used to do good, to help others. But now, they learned that their former pastor was living in extreme luxury, using the wealth generated from their donations to buy properties and live a life that seemed to go against everything he had preached. It felt like their sacrifices had been taken for granted. Some church members tried to justify Morris's lifestyle, arguing that he had worked hard for his success and that his wealth was a sign of God's favor. After all, Gateway Church had grown into one of the largest and most influential churches in the country under his leadership. His success was undeniable, and for some it seemed only natural that he should enjoy the fruits of his labor. They pointed to the idea that Morris had built a massive ministry, changing the lives of thousands of people. In their eyes, his wealth wasn't something to criticize, it was a result of his hard work and devotion. But for many others, this argument didn't hold up. They couldn't ignore the fact that Morris had spent years telling them to live humbly, to give generously, and to trust in God for their needs. Now it seemed that the man they had looked up to was doing the complete opposite. The vast wealth he had accumulated, combined with his luxury real estate deals, felt like a slap in the face to the very people who had supported him. How could a pastor who preached about selflessness live in mansions worth more than some people's entire neighborhoods? How could someone who had built his career on messages of sacrifice now demand millions in retirement benefits and live a lifestyle that seemed completely detached from the struggles of the people he once served? As more details emerged, the sense of betrayal grew. People began to question not just Morris's financial decisions, but the entire culture of the megachurch that had allowed it to happen. Morris wasn't alone in this. Many pastors of large churches had built their ministries on similar messages of sacrifice and humility, only to live in extravagant wealth. For critics, this raised the question, at what point did the message of faith and service get replaced by a desire for power and wealth? Was the message really about helping others, or was it about building a personal empire? The reality of Morris's lifestyle became harder to ignore. Photos of his luxury homes, his expensive cars, and even his lavish vacations began circulating online. It wasn't just that Morris had wealth, it was the way he flaunted it. He didn't just live in expensive homes, he moved from mansion to mansion, buying and selling properties as if it were a hobby. For some, this was the final straw. The man who had stood at the pulpit preaching about generosity, humility, and putting God above material wealth was now living in a way that seemed to contradict every word he had ever said. The outrage wasn't just about the properties or the cars, it was about the deeper message that Morris had been preaching for years. His teachings had been about generosity, about putting others first, and about living a life of simplicity and sacrifice. But now, it seemed like those teachings were just words, meant to inspire others to give, while Morris himself reaped the benefits of their generosity. It felt like a betrayal not just of his congregation, but of the very principles that had built Gateway Church into the powerhouse it had become. As the scandal grew, the divide between Morris and his followers deepened. Some still stood by him, believing that he had earned the right to enjoy the wealth he had accumulated. After all, hadn't he worked tirelessly to build Gateway Church into what it was? But for many others, the disconnect between his teachings and his lifestyle was too much to overlook. They felt like they had been deceived, like the man they had trusted had built his fortune on their sacrifices. It wasn't just about the money, it was about trust. Morris had told them one thing, but his actions told a completely different story. This divide wasn't limited to Gateway Church. The scandals surrounding Morris's lifestyle sparked a larger conversation about the culture of megachurches and the relationship between wealth and faith. For years, megachurch pastors like Morris had built their empires on the idea that they were spiritual leaders chosen by God to lead their congregations. They preached about living simply, about trusting in God's provision, and about using wealth to serve others. But now, as their personal wealth came into the spotlight, people began to question whether these leaders were living out their own teachings or simply using faith as a way to build personal fortunes. Morris, once the beloved pastor of Gateway Church, was now seen by many as a symbol of everything that was wrong with the modern church. His luxurious lifestyle, his fight for millions in retirement benefits, and his continued pursuit of wealth, while his congregation struggled to make ends meet, painted a picture that many people couldn't reconcile with the message of faith, humility, and service he had preached for so long. To many, it wasn't just a personal failure, it was a betrayal of everything the church was supposed to stand for. The scandal around Robert Morris didn't just hurt his reputation, it hurt the reputation of the entire megachurch model. It forced people to ask tough questions about the role of wealth in the church, about the motivations of spiritual leaders, and about the ways in which faith and money had become intertwined in ways that seemed dangerous and damaging. Morris's luxurious lifestyle, once hidden behind the walls of his mansions, was now on full display for the world to see. And for many, it was a painful reminder of how far removed the church had become from the values it was supposed to embody.